If you think you already know everything about Jimin, wait. Because Netflix just gave us something that made thousands of armies around the world stop scrolling, stop talking, and just stare at their screens in silence. Not because he was singing, not because he was dancing, but because of one moment behind the camera, one single frame that lasted only a few seconds, yet somehow felt heavier, deeper, and more intense than anything you've ever seen from him before. And today, we're breaking down exactly why this moment hits different. Why the Jimin showing up in this Netflix era is not the same Jimin we've known for years. And why the entire internet, not just ARMY, is feeling it too. Stay with me, because this is not just another BTS video. Before we get into the details of that footage, we need to understand what's actually happening here. This is not just BTS making content. This is not just Netflix doing promo. This is the collision of two massive forces at a very specific moment in history. BTS just dropped Erarang, the album millions of fans around the world have been waiting for since all 7 members completed their mandatory military service. An album that isn't just about music, it's about identity, about who they are now, after surviving years that were anything but easy. And Netflix, a platform with a reach spanning over 200 countries, chose to stand beside them, not just as a broadcaster, but as a partner, as a witness to this moment. And in the middle of all of that, one person keeps pulling focus. Not because he's forcing it, but precisely because he isn't. ParkJimin, the behind-the-scenes footage that recently spread across social media, pulled from a BTS X Netflix promotional photo shoot, shows Jimin in the most visually simple way possible. Long blonde hair nearly covering his eyes, an all-black outfit, a dark studio, a sliver of light, no manufactured expression, no posed-up energy, but there is something there that people cannot stop watching. And that's exactly what we need to understand. Okay, let's look more closely. In the footage, Jimin is standing, or more accurately, existing, in front of the camera with this incredibly settled stillness. Not the stillness of someone waiting, the stillness of someone who is completely present. His eyes aren't locked on the lens. His head is turned slightly. And in that brief moment, you can see someone who has been through a lot and no longer needs to prove anything. There's a Korean word that gets brought up a lot when people talk about Jimin, wonjegam, jonjegam. The literal translation is presence, or sense of existence. But the meaning goes much deeper than that. It's about how someone can fill a room not with sound or movement, but simply by being there. And in this Netflix footage, Jimin's jonjegam hits you through a phone screen. But here's what makes this even more interesting. Why does this feel different from similar footage we've seen in the past? The answer is in the context and in the transformation. If you followed Jimin's journey from the beginning, from the trainee who almost didn't debut, to the artist collaborating with the world's biggest entertainment platform, you know there have been many versions of Jimin we've witnessed. There was the young, energetic Jimin who always wanted to make everyone happy. There was the fearless Jimin who stepped way outside his comfort zone with his solo album Face, one of the most artistically daring K-pop albums of the decade. There was the vulnerable Jimin who spoke openly about his struggles with self-doubt and the crushing pressure of the industry. And now there's this Jimin, the Jimin sitting behind a Netflix camera with an expression that's almost impossible to read. Not because he's hiding something, but because he's arrived at a place where he doesn't need to show everything anymore. A place where presence is enough, where silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. This isn't an accident. This is the result of years of a journey, including a period of mandatory military service that many believe was a massive turning point for all of the BTS members. Military service isn't just about serving your country. For an artist, it's a pause from the spotlight, from expectations, from a schedule that never stops. And when someone returns from that silence, one of two things happens. They come back the same, or they come back as a deeper version of themselves. Jimin is clearly the second. Now here's an interesting question. Why Netflix? BTS has their own YouTube channel. HYB has internal content teams. There's Weverse, there's fan platforms. Plenty of ways to distribute content like this. But there's a reason why a Netflix collaboration feels different. And that reason isn't just about reach. Netflix is a platform that consistently takes heavy, serious, artistically challenging content and presents it to a global audience. From documentary portraits of iconic artists to cinematic concert films, to stories that mainstream Hollywood never would have touched. Netflix doesn't play with content. So when Netflix chooses to get involved with BTS, that's not purely a marketing decision. That's an artistic statement. And that statement hits hardest in the Jimin sections. Look at how that footage is framed. No aggressive close-ups. No dramatic angles. It's a framing that gives space. That says, we don't need to force this moment. Let it exist. Let the audience find it themselves. That's a cinematic choice. And it's very different from most K-pop content, which tends to be more explosive, more flashy, more look over here. Netflix saw something in Jimin that they felt needed to be handled differently. And the audience felt it. After this footage started spreading, the reactions that came up on social media were fascinating to analyze. Not because of a scale, though the scale was massive, but because of a type. Usually when Jimin content goes viral, the comments are explosive. All caps. Emoji chains. I'm not okay. ParkJimin, you can't do this to me. Every expression of overwhelming joy that is the universal language of fandoms. But this time, something was different. Mixed in with all those explosive comments, there was a quieter wave. People writing paragraphs, sharing reflections, saying things like, "There's something in his eyes that makes me want to cry, but I don't know why." Or, "This isn't the Jimin I knew before. This is something deeper." And it wasn't just ARMY. There were comments from people who openly admitted they weren't BTS fans, weren't even K-pop fans, who somehow stumbled across this footage and felt pulled in. Who wrote, "I don't know who this person is, but there's something about the way he stands that made me stop scrolling." That's not a fandom effect. That's universal communication. When someone radiates a stillness that comes from within, not a performed stillness, but an earned stillness, the kind that only comes from going through things, other people feel it. Across language, across culture, across genre. And that's exactly what's happening with Jimin in this era. We cannot talk about Jimin in this era without talking about Arirang. Arirang is not a typical album. The title itself says everything. Arirang is one of the oldest and most universally known Korean folk songs, a symbol of longing, of parting, of the journey home. When BTS chose that word as the title for their comeback album, they were making a declaration. This is not just pop music. This is a statement about identity, about roots, about who they truly are underneath all the grandeur they've built. And in that context, every gesture, every expression, every second of behind-the-scenes footage we see from this era carries layers of meaning that go far deeper than promo content. Jimin in that Netflix footage isn't just promoting an album. He's standing inside a moment that people will remember. And he knows it, not in an arrogant or calculated way, but in the way of an artist who has made a long journey and arrived somewhere he can be fully present without needing to do anything extra. Arirang as an album is also fascinating because it arrives at a point where all 7 BTS members are returning as different versions of themselves. Some more vocally mature, some more musically experimental, some more lyrically open. And Jimin, based on everything we've seen so far, arrives with the thing that's hardest to define but easiest to feel: depth. This is not a question meant to spark a debate about who's the best. In BTS, every member has their own unique strengths. But there's something specific about Jimin that needs to be acknowledged objectively. Jimin is the only BTS member whose formal training background is contemporary dance. Not music, not vocal training, dance. And that shapes the way he occupies a room, the way he uses his body, the way he communicates non-verbally in a way that is fundamentally different from the other members. Contemporary dancers, especially at the level Jimin trained, are taught to be aware of every millimeter of their body's movement. They're taught to understand that communication isn't only about what you say or sing. It's about how you are present, how you breathe, how you fill space. And you can see that very clearly in this Netflix footage. Jimin is standing there without doing anything that's technically impressive. No high kicks, no spins, no choreography. But if you know how to look, you can see that his body is never truly still. There are constant micro-adjustments. There is an awareness that never turns off. Like an engine that never shuts down, just running in a very quiet mode. That is an extraordinarily rare thing. And Netflix, with their level of production quality, managed to capture it. Now let's talk about why all of this matters, not just as a moment, but as the opening chapter of something much larger. Netflix didn't release this photo shoot footage randomly. It's part of a very deliberate promotional campaign for two major projects, the BTS live concert at Gwanghwamun Square on March 21st and the documentary BTS, The Return dropping March 27th. The Gwanghwamun concert is not just a concert, it's a deeply symbolic choice. Gwanghwamun is one of the most iconic landmarks in Korea, the Grand Gate standing at the entrance of Gyeongbokgung Palace, a place where history and modernity meet. BTS didn't choose that location for its capacity. They chose it for its meaning. This is BTS saying we're home. And we're returning not with stadiums and record-breaking numbers, but with something rooted. And the documentary The Return, the title alone promises something more personal, more raw, more honest than standard promo content. A great documentary doesn't just show the triumphant moments. A great documentary shows the process, the doubt, the exhaustion, the questions without easy answers, and the decision to keep moving forward anyway. If a few seconds of behind-the-scenes footage from a photo shoot is enough to stop people in their tracks, imagine what's waiting in a 90-minute documentary about Jimin and his bandmates finding their way back to the stage. This is only the beginning. There's a concept discussed often in the world of performing arts, particularly in theater and contemporary dance, called quiet presence. It's the ability of a performer to command an audience's attention not by doing something big, but simply by being there in a way that is completely whole. This is an extraordinarily difficult skill to teach. You can teach vocal technique. You can teach choreography. You can teach someone how to pose for a camera. But you cannot teach someone to have quiet presence. It's something that emerges from within, from a certain level of maturity, from enough lived experience, from a comfort with yourself that doesn't come overnight. And Jimin, in this Netflix footage, is displaying a quiet presence that is deeply mature. This isn't about age. There are performers far older who never get here. This is about the journey, about how deep someone is willing to go inside themselves, and how honest they're willing to be with what they find there. Jimin has spoken openly about his insecurities, about how often he felt like he wasn't good enough, about the standards he set for himself that were frequently impossible to meet. And all of that struggle appears to have transformed into something different now. Not gone, but transformed into a deeper awareness, a more earned stillness. And when an artist arrives at that place, you can see it, even in a few seconds of footage behind a Netflix camera. Something interesting happened as era content started circulating online. It wasn't only ARMY reacting. Professional photographers began commenting on the technical aspects of how Jimin was captured in the footage. Fashion critics started writing about how that simple all-black styling actually amplified his presence more powerfully than anything elaborate would have. Choreographers were tweeting about his body language and how it reflects a very specific contemporary dance training. And most interestingly, entertainment journalists from outside the K-pop world started writing about Jimin, not as a BTS member, but as an artist in his own right, as a cultural phenomenon worth analyzing seriously. This is a meaningful shift. For years, there's been a certain bias from Western entertainment circles toward K-pop in general, the assumption that this is manufactured pop, more visual than substantial. And BTS, of course, has long dismantled that assumption. But there's a specific level where industry recognition becomes more personal, when people inside the industry start paying attention not because of numbers, but because of a quality that simply cannot be ignored. Jimin is at that level now. And this Netflix footage, in its simplicity, is becoming one of the pieces of evidence. To fully understand why Jimin in this Netflix era feels so different, we have to go back to one specific moment in his timeline: the release of Face. Face was Jimin's debut solo album, and it was unlike almost anything else being released in K-pop at that time. The concept was blunt, confrontation with self. The production was dark, minimalist, and unapologetically Western in its influences. And the lead single, Like Crazy, did something no K-pop solo track had done before. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But beyond the chart history, what Face did for Jimin artistically was enormous. It gave him a space to be something other than Jimin from BTS. Not to separate from BTS, he's never wanted that, but to establish that he had a creative identity that existed independently of the group. That he had things to say that were specifically his. And that confidence, the confidence of someone who has stood alone in the middle of a massive spotlight and held their ground, is exactly what you're seeing in this Netflix footage. There's a version of Jimin before face and a version after. Before, still searching, still trying to define what his artistry looks like outside of choreography and group dynamics. After, settled, clear, not louder, but more grounded. The Jimin behind that Netflix camera isn't just a member of BTS doing a photo shoot. He's an artist with a fully formed identity who happens to also be 1/7 of the biggest group in the world. And that distinction, subtle as it sounds, changes everything about how you read his presence. Face was the rehearsal. Arirang is the main stage. And this footage is Jimin walking out of the wings before the lights come up. We're near the end of this video, and I want you to sit with one thought. Every era in an artist's journey leaves something behind. There are moments that years from now you'll look back on and say, that's when everything changed. For BTS as a whole, the Arirang era is almost certainly one of those moments. A return after military service, a Netflix partnership, a brave and meaningful album, a concert in a location weighted with history. These are all elements of a new chapter that is very aware of its own significance. And within that chapter, Jimin arrives not as someone still searching for who he is, but as someone who has found that, and now simply gets to express it. That behind-the-scenes footage is a clue. Not a spoiler, not clickbait. It's a genuine signal of what you're going to see at Gwangwamun, in the Return documentary, and in everything that follows. This Jimin is different, not because he became someone else, but because he has finally, fully become himself, without filters, without fear. And that is a genuinely rare thing to witness. That was our full breakdown of Jimin's Netflix behind-the-scenes moment. Something small in duration, but enormous in what it says about where Jimin stands right now as an artist and as a person. If this video made you think, if any part of it resonated with you, drop a comment below. I want to know which section hit you the hardest. And if you want to keep getting coverage of the Arirang era, from the Gwangwamun concert to the Netflix documentary to everything that's bound to happen in between, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. Because this is just the beginning. And you don't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and stay present, like Jimin always reminds us to do.